Hi, I'm Valentina. I'm 32 years old, and I run a successful interior design firm in Austin, Texas. My company has been featured in Architectural Digest. I've designed homes for local celebrities, and I just signed a contract for a luxury hotel renovation worth $500,000. But 12 years ago, when I was just 17, my parents kicked me out of our family home because of a lie my brother told, and they have never, not once, apologized for it. Last Tuesday, I was sitting in my office reviewing fabric samples for a client's living room when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. No voice on the other end, just a text that came through a second later. Shah, we miss you. Can we talk? I knew immediately it was my mother. Same area code, same passive phrasing, like the past 12 years of silence were just a minor misunderstanding. If you've ever been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you've ever had your truth twisted into a lie so convincing that even you started to doubt yourself, then subscribe to this channel. I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll understand why silence is sometimes more powerful than forgiveness. And you'll see exactly what it cost them when they came crawling back. So here's my question for you. What would you do if the person who hurt you the most suddenly reappeared after years, not to apologize, but because they needed something from you? Let me take you back to where it all started. It was late October, 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. I was a senior in high school, working part-time at a local coffee shop to save money for college. My brother Marco was 19, technically enrolled at community college, but mostly he was sleeping until noon and going out with friends I didn't recognize. Our parents, my mom taught elementary school, my dad managed a hardware store, were busy, stressed, and increasingly frustrated with Marco's lack of direction. I remember the exact moment everything fell apart. It was a Sunday evening. We were supposed to have family dinner, but Marco didn't come home. My mom kept checking her phone, texting him, getting no response. My dad paced the kitchen, muttering about responsibility. I set the table, reheated the lasagna, and tried to make myself invisible. That's what I'd learned to do in our house. Stay quiet, stay helpful, don't make waves. Around 8 o'clock, Marco finally walked in. His eyes were red, his jaw tight. He didn't look at me. He went straight to our parents and said, his voice shaking, "We need to talk. It's about Valentina." My stomach dropped. I hadn't done anything. I knew I hadn't. But the way he said my name, like it tasted bitter, made me feel guilty anyway. My parents turned to me and I saw it in their faces. They'd already decided I was at fault. Marco told them that $2,000 was missing from the safe in my dad's office. He said he'd noticed it a few days ago, but hadn't wanted to say anything. He said he'd seen me going into the office late at night. He said one of his friends had told him I was buying drugs, that I'd gotten in with a bad crowd, that I was out of control. Every word was a lie. But I watched my parents' faces harden, watched my mother's hand go to her mouth, watched my father's fists clench. And I knew in that moment that the truth didn't matter. They believed him. "Valentina," my mom said, her voice cold and distant, like she was talking to a stranger. "Is this true?" "No," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't take anything. I don't even know the combination to the safe." "Mom, Dad, I swear." "Don't lie to us," my father said, and his voice was so harsh it felt like a slap. "Marco wouldn't make this up." I looked at my brother. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands were trembling, and I realized suddenly that he was terrified. Not of me, of being caught. "Marco," I said, my voice louder now, desperate. "Tell them the truth, please." He shook his head. "I wish I didn't have to do this, Val, but I can't cover for you anymore." That's when I started crying. Not quiet tears, ugly, gasping sobs. I begged them to listen. I told them I'd never touched the safe, never even thought about it. I offered to take a drug test, to show them my bank account, to let them search my room. None of it mattered. My mother stood up, her face a mask of disappointment. "I raised you better than this," she said. "Pack your things and leave." "Mom, please." "Don't come back," my father added, his voice flat, "until you're ready to tell the truth." I looked at Marco one last time. He was standing behind our parents, and for just a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But then it was gone, and he turned away. That night, I packed a duffel bag with clothes, my laptop, my school books, and the one thing I couldn't leave behind, a silver bracelet my grandmother had given me before she died. It was delicate, engraved with tiny flowers, and she'd told me, "Never let anyone define who you are, Valentina." As I was leaving, my mother grabbed my wrist. Her fingers dug in, and she tried to yank the bracelet off. "You don't deserve anything from this family," she hissed. I pulled away, hard enough that the bracelet bent, a small dent forming in the silver, but I kept it. I walked out of that house with nowhere to go and no one to call. The next few weeks were a blur. I stayed with my best friend Jenna for a while, sleeping on her couch. But her parents weren't comfortable with a long-term arrangement. I tried calling my aunt, my uncle, even a cousin I barely knew. My parents had already told everyone their version of the story. No one believed me. I remember sitting in my car one night, parked outside the public library because it was warm and had Wi-Fi, scrolling through my phone. My mom had removed me from the family group chat. My dad had unfriended me on Facebook. Marco had blocked my number. I thought about going back, about confessing to something I didn't do, just to have a place to sleep. But every time I looked at the bracelet on my wrist, dented, damaged, but still mine, I heard my grandmother's voice. "Never let anyone define who you are." So I didn't go back. I finished high school while working 2 part-time jobs, one at the coffee shop, one cleaning offices at night. I moved into a tiny studio apartment with a roommate who was rarely home. I applied for scholarships and enrolled in online classes at a state university. I was exhausted, lonely, and angrier than I'd ever been in my life. But I survived. And slowly, very slowly, I started to build something. Fast forward 12 years. I'm 32. I own my business. I have a loft in downtown Austin with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline. I've been featured in design magazines. I've spoken at industry conferences. I've built a life I'm proud of entirely on my own. I haven't spoken to my parents in over a decade. I haven't seen Marco. I didn't go to family weddings, funerals, or holidays. I didn't send cards or make phone calls. I simply disappeared. But I did keep tabs. Social media makes that easy, even when you're not connected. I knew Marco had dropped out of college. I knew he'd gotten married and divorced within 3 years. I knew he was living with our parents again, unemployed, posting vague inspirational quotes about finding himself. And I knew from a mutual acquaintance that my parents had been asking about me. Not to apologize, just to see if the rumors about my success were true. So when I got that text, "We miss you. Can we talk?" I wasn't surprised. I was furious. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to type back, "You had 12 years to miss me. Where were you when I was sleeping in my car? Where were you when I was working 3 jobs to pay for college?" But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small box. Inside was the silver bracelet, the one my grandmother had given me. I'd had it professionally repaired years ago, but I'd kept the original bent piece as well, preserved in a separate compartment. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that night. I remembered my mother's grip on my wrist. I remembered walking out with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken promise. That bracelet had become more than jewelry. It was a symbol of survival, of resilience, of the person I'd had to become when my family decided I wasn't worth believing. I slipped it onto my wrist, feeling the cool metal against my skin, and then I started planning. Over the next few days, I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out to people from my past. First, I contacted Sophia, an old friend of Marco's. We'd been close in high school before everything fell apart. I knew she'd stayed in touch with my brother for a while after I left. I sent her a message on Instagram, casual and friendly, asking if she'd be willing to meet for coffee. She responded within an hour. "I've been hoping you'd reach out," she wrote. "There's something I need to tell you." We met at a cafe on the east side of town. Sophia looked older, we all did, but there was a nervousness in her eyes that I recognized. She ordered a latte, I ordered black coffee and we sat outside in the October sun. I know why you wanted to talk, she said before I could even ask. It's about Marco, isn't it? I nodded. She sighed, stirring her drink without drinking it. I should have said something 12 years ago. I was a coward. I'm so sorry, Valentina. What are you talking about? Marco told me the truth, she said quietly. About the money, about the lie. He came to me a few weeks after you left, drunk and crying, saying he'd ruined your life. He told me he'd taken the money to pay off a gambling debt, some poker game with older guys from his dorm. He was terrified they'd hurt him if he didn't pay, so he took the money from your dad's safe and blamed you. I felt my hands go cold. I'd suspected it, of course, but hearing it confirmed after all these years was different. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked, my voice steady even though my chest was tight. I was scared, Sophia admitted. Marco begged me not to say anything. He said it would destroy his family. He said you'd be fine, that you'd come back eventually and everyone would forget about it. I believed him. I thought it would blow over. It didn't. I know. Her eyes were wet. I've felt guilty every single day since. When I saw your company online, saw how successful you are, I wanted to reach out, but I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. I do, I said, because I need your help. That evening, I made another call. This one was harder. Mr. Chen owned a small convenience store near my old neighborhood. He'd been kind to me when I was a kid, always slipping me free candy or letting me sit in the back room when I needed a quiet place to do homework. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, but I remembered him mentioning once that Marco used to come into his store asking to borrow money. I drove to the store, parked outside, and walked in. The bell above the door chimed, and Mr. Chen looked up from behind the counter. His hair was grayer, his shoulders a little more stooped, but his smile was the same. Valentina, he said, his voice full of surprise. Is that really you? Hi, Mr. Chen. He came around the counter and pulled me into a hug. Look at you, all grown up. I heard you're doing big things. I'm trying, I said. Can we talk? We sat in the back room, surrounded by boxes of inventory, and I told him why I was there. I explained what had happened 12 years ago, how Marco had lied, how my parents had believed him. Mr. Chen listened, his face growing sadder with every sentence. When I finished, he shook his head. That boy, he muttered. I remember that time. He owed money to a lot of people around here, came in almost every week asking for $20, $50, $100. I stopped lending to him after a while. Would you be willing to write that down? I asked. As a statement? He didn't hesitate. Of course. Your family should have believed you. I'll do whatever I can to help. By the end of the week, I had what I needed. Bank statements proving I hadn't withdrawn any money around the time of the theft. An email from my grandmother, sent just before she died, telling my parents she believed I was innocent. Sophia's written testimony about Marco's confession. Mr. Chen's statement about the debts. I also had something else. An invitation. My uncle, my dad's brother, was hosting a family reunion. Apparently it was going to be a big event with cousins and aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in over a decade. My mother had sent me another text, this time more insistent. It's time to let the past go, Valentina. Your family misses you. I almost laughed when I read it. Let the past go, as if 12 years of silence and rejection were something I could just forget. But I replied, I'll be there. Because it was time. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to make sure the truth finally came out. The reunion was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in mid-November at my uncle's house in the suburbs, the same neighborhood where I'd grown up, the same streets I used to walk to school. I hadn't been back in 12 years, and as I drove through those familiar roads, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and nausea. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The houses, the yards, even the sky seemed to press down lower than it used to. I parked a block away and sat in my car for a few minutes, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I'd dressed carefully for this. A tailored navy blazer, white blouse, dark jeans, understated jewelry except for the silver bracelet on my wrist. Professional, put together, successful. I wanted them to see exactly what I'd become without them. In my leather tote bag, I had a folder. Inside were printed copies of everything I'd gathered: the bank statements, my grandmother's email, Sophia's written testimony, Mr. Chen's letter. I'd also invited both Sophia and Mr. Chen to come, though I'd told them to arrive an hour into the event. I wanted my family to feel comfortable first, to let their guard down before the truth walked through the door. I took a deep breath, grabbed the bag, and got out of the car. My uncle's house was full of people when I arrived. I could hear voices and laughter spilling out into the front yard, the smell of grilled meat and roasted vegetables drifting through the open windows. I walked up the driveway slowly, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The front door was open. I stepped inside. For a moment, no one noticed me. The living room was packed. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely recognized, kids running around with paper plates. And then my cousin Lisa saw me. Her eyes went wide. "Valentina?" The room went quiet. Heads turned. I saw my uncle first, standing by the fireplace with a beer in his hand. Then my aunt in the kitchen doorway. And then, at the far end of the room, I saw them. My mother, my father, and Marco. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father just stared. Marco looked down at his shoes. My uncle recovered first. He walked over, smiling, arms open. "Valentina, my God, it's been forever. Come here." He hugged me and I let him, even though my body was rigid. When he pulled back, he looked me up and down. "Look at you. You look amazing. I've been reading about your business. Very impressive." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. Come in, get some food. Everyone's here." I walked further into the room and people started approaching me. Cousins I hadn't seen since high school. An aunt who hugged me and said she'd always wondered how I was doing. A younger cousin who said she'd followed my Instagram and loved my work. It was surreal. They were acting like I'd just been away on a long trip, like the past 12 years of silence were nothing. And then my mother appeared in front of me. She looked older, grayer, thinner. But her eyes were the same, cautious, guarded, and trying very hard to seem warm. "Valentina," she said softly, "I'm so glad you came." She reached out as if to hug me, and I took a small step back. Not obvious enough to make a scene, but enough that she noticed. Her arms dropped. "Hi, Mom," I said. "You look wonderful," she said, her voice tight. "Truly. We've been hearing such great things about your work." "Have you?" "Yes. Your uncle showed us some pictures. The hotel you're designing, it's beautiful." "Thank you." There was an awkward pause. My father came up beside her, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Good to see you, Val," he said gruffly. "Dad, you hungry? There's plenty of food." I nodded. "I'll grab something in a bit." My mother smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, we're just so happy you're here. It's been too long." I didn't respond. I just looked at her, and I saw her falter. She glanced at my father, then back at me. "We should catch up later," she said quickly. "There's so much to talk about." "Sure," I said. And then I walked past them, into the kitchen, leaving them standing there. Marco didn't come near me for the first hour. I saw him hovering on the edges of rooms, holding a plate of food he wasn't eating, looking miserable. At one point, my cousin Lisa pulled me aside and whispered, "I heard Marco's been having a tough time. Divorced, living with your parents again. Honestly, I feel bad for him." I almost laughed. Feel bad for him? "Yeah," I said neutrally. "I heard. Are you guys going to talk?" "Maybe." But I had no intention of talking to Marco. Not yet. Not until the moment I was ready. Instead, I made small talk with relatives I barely knew. I answered questions about my business, about Austin, about my life. Everyone was polite, friendly even. But no one mentioned the elephant in the room. No one asked why I'd been gone for 12 years. No one brought up the night I was kicked out. It was like they'd all agreed, collectively, to pretend it never happened. At around 3 o'clock, my uncle called for everyone's attention. He stood in the center of the living room, holding up his beer. "I just want to say how great it is to have the whole family here today," he said, smiling around at everyone. "It's been too long since we've all been together, and I think we can all agree it's time to let go of the past and focus on the future." There were murmurs of agreement. My mother nodded, wiping at her eyes. My father looked stoic. My uncle raised his glass. To family. To family, everyone echoed. I didn't drink. My uncle turned to me, still smiling. Valentina, I'm especially glad you're here. I know it's been a hard road, but I hope this is the beginning of healing. So tell me, are you happy to be back with your family? Every eye in the room turned to me. I set down my glass. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Actually, I said, my voice calm and clear, I think it's time we talked about what really happened 12 years ago. The room went very still. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, a bank statement from November 12 years ago. I held it up. 12 years ago, I said, I was kicked out of my parents' house because Marco told them I stole $2,000 from my dad's safe to buy drugs. I was 17. I had nowhere to go, and no one believed me when I said I was innocent. My mother's face went pale. My father stood up. Valentina, this isn't the time. When is the time, Dad? I interrupted. You've had 12 years to ask me about it. You've had 12 years to wonder if maybe, just maybe, you made a mistake. But you didn't. So I'm going to tell you the truth now, in front of everyone, because I'm done being silent. I looked around the room. My cousins were frozen. My aunts and uncles looked uncomfortable. Marco was staring at the floor, his face red. I held up the bank statement. This is proof that I didn't withdraw any money from my account during that time. I've also brought an email from Grandma sent to Mom and Dad a week before she died. In it, she says she believes I'm innocent. She told you to listen to me, but you didn't. I pulled out Sophia's letter next. This is a written statement from Sofia Herrera, Marco's friend from high school. In it, she confirms that Marco admitted to her, just a few weeks after I was kicked out, that he lied. He told her he took the money to pay off a gambling debt. He begged her not to say anything. My mother made a small sound, a gasp, or maybe a sob. My father's face was hard, unreadable. I pulled out the last document. And this is a letter from Mr. Chen, who owns the convenience store on Maple Street. He confirms that Marco owed money to multiple people in the neighborhood around that time. He lent Marco money himself more than once. I set the papers down on the coffee table and looked directly at my parents. Marco lied, I said, and you believed him. You didn't just believe him, you threw me out. You cut me off. You told everyone I was a thief and a drug addict. You erased me from your lives. And now, 12 years later, you want to reconnect. Not because you're sorry, not because you realize you were wrong, but because you heard I'm successful. And suddenly I'm worth knowing again. My mother was crying now, silent tears running down her face. My father looked like he'd been punched. Valentina, my mother whispered, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, I said. Because knowing would mean admitting you were wrong, and that was too hard, wasn't it? There was a knock at the door. My uncle, looking dazed, went to answer it. Sophia walked in first, her face nervous but determined. Mr. Chen followed, looking around the room with a kind, sad expression. This is Sophia, I said, and Mr. Chen. They're here because I asked them to tell you the truth in person. Sophia stepped forward. She looked at my parents, then at Marco. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, she said, her voice shaking. But Marco told me the truth. He told me he took the money for gambling debts. He told me he was terrified of what would happen if he didn't pay. And he told me he blamed Valentina because it was easier than admitting what he'd done. Mr. Chen nodded. Marco came to my store many times asking to borrow money. I have records if you need them. He was in over his head. The room was silent. Everyone turned to Marco. He was shaking. His face was red, his eyes wet. His voice cracked. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My mother stood up, her hands trembling. Why didn't you tell us? She asked him, her voice breaking. Why didn't you tell us the truth? I don't know, Marco said, and he started crying, ugly, desperate crying. I thought it would be okay. I thought she'd come back and we'd figure it out and it wouldn't matter. I didn't think it would go this far. It went exactly as far as it needed to, I said coldly, because you never told the truth, and neither did they. I looked at my parents. You could have listened to me. You could have asked questions. You could have given me the benefit of the doubt, but you didn't. You chose to believe the worst about me, and you threw me away like I didn't matter. My father finally spoke. His voice was rough. We did what we thought was right at the time. No, I said. You did what was easiest. You believed Marco because it was easier than believing your daughter might be telling the truth. You didn't want to deal with the mess, so you got rid of me. We were trying to protect this family, my mother said, her voice rising. We thought. You thought wrong, I cut her off. And you never once considered that you might have made a mistake. Not once in 12 years. My mother looked at me, her face crumpling. What do you want us to say, Valentina? That we're sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. We're both sorry. Is that what you want to hear? I stared at her for a long moment. And then I said, very quietly, I want you to understand what you took from me. I want you to understand that I had to build my entire life from nothing because you decided I wasn't worth believing. I want you to know that every success I've had, every good thing in my life happened without you. And I did it on purpose. I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. I came here today to tell the truth, I said, not for you, for me. Because I'm done carrying your shame. And I walked out. I didn't go home right away. I drove to a park on the edge of town and sat on a bench overlooking the lake, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed. Texts from relatives, from my uncle, even one from my mother. But I didn't read them. Not yet. Instead, I took off the silver bracelet and held it in my palm. The dent was still there, faint but visible, even after all the repairs. I ran my thumb over it, remembering the night I'd left. Remembering my mother's grip, remembering the choice I'd made to keep it. This bracelet had been my grandmother's way of telling me I was stronger than I knew. And she'd been right. I slipped it back onto my wrist and looked out at the water, feeling, for the first time in 12 years, like I could breathe. A week later, Sophia and I met for lunch. She'd been anxious since the reunion, texting me multiple times to make sure I was okay. I reassured her that I was, and I meant it. I still can't believe you did that, she said, shaking her head. You were so calm, I would have lost it. I've had 12 years to prepare, I said with a small smile. Do you think they'll reach out again? Probably, but it doesn't matter. This was never about them forgiving me. It was about me proving I didn't need their forgiveness. Sophia nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm really proud of you. Thank you, and thank you for being there. It meant more than you know. We talked for a while longer, and by the end of lunch, we'd made plans to meet again the following week. It felt good to have her back in my life. Not as a reminder of the past, but as someone who understood what it had taken to get here. A month later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my parents. I almost threw it away without opening it. But something made me sit down at my kitchen table, pour myself a glass of wine, and read it. The letter was 2 pages long. My mother's handwriting on the first page, my father's on the second. They apologized. Not in the vague, defensive way they had at the reunion, but in detail. They wrote about how they'd been wrong, how they'd failed me, how they'd let fear and pride keep them from seeing the truth. They admitted they'd been too focused on protecting Marco, on keeping the family together, to consider what they were doing to me. They didn't make excuses. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They just said they were sorry, and they understood if I never wanted to speak to them again. I read the letter twice, then set it down on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired. I walked over to my desk and opened the small glass case where I kept my grandmother's bracelet. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The silver caught the light, and I thought about how many times I'd looked at this bracelet over the years, how it had been my anchor when everything else felt uncertain. I didn't need it to remind me anymore. I knew who I was now. I placed the bracelet carefully back in the case and closed it. Then I sat down and wrote a reply. I didn't forgive them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wrote back and told them the truth, that I'd spent 12 years learning to survive without them, and I didn't need them now. I told them that if they wanted to be part of my life again, it wouldn't be on their terms. It would be on mine, and it would take time. Years, maybe, before I could even think about rebuilding what they'd destroyed. I told them that forgiveness wasn't something they could demand, it was something they'd have to earn. I sealed the letter and mailed it the next day. 6 months later, I hired Sophia as my company's marketing director. She was brilliant, creative, and understood the vision I had for the business. We worked well together, and slowly our professional relationship turned into a real friendship. My business kept growing. I took on bigger projects, hired more staff, opened a second office. My name became more recognizable in the industry. And with every success, I felt a little more distance from the girl who'd been kicked out of her parents' house at 17. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was someone else entirely, someone stronger, someone who didn't need validation from people who'd refused to believe in her. One evening, I was working late in my office when I got a text from my uncle. He'd stayed in touch occasionally, always respectful, never pushing. This time, he sent me a photo, a family gathering, much smaller than the reunion. My parents were there, but they looked different. Older, quieter, like something fundamental had shifted in them. The caption read, "They ask about you often. No pressure, but know that the door is always open." I stared at the photo for a long time, and then I typed back, "I appreciate that. I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday." That night, I opened the glass case one more time and took out the bracelet. I slipped it onto my wrist, feeling its familiar weight. I looked at my reflection in the window, 32 years old, standing in my own office, in a life I'd built entirely on my own terms. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, and I meant it. If you've ever been silenced by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you've ever had to prove your innocence when you shouldn't have had to, share your story in the comments. I'll read every single one, and I believe you. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss other stories about finding yourself again after deep hurt. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about becoming someone strong enough to remember and still move forward.